My brother got everything the day I signed the papers. The farmhouse, the barn, the 40 acres our grandfather broke his back clearing outside Didsbury. My lawyer sat beside me, absolutely still, like if he moved he might say something he couldn't take back. Across the conference table, my brother leaned back in his chair with the particular ease of someone who believes they've already won. He didn't look at me. He looked at the documents. That was fine. I looked at them too. I knew what was in every single line. That Tuesday started like most Tuesdays in my life for the past 6 years. I was up before 5, checking the forecast on my phone. -18. Wind chill making it feel like -26 before driving 40 minutes north on Highway 2 to open the property. Check the water lines. Make sure the heating system in the barn hadn't tripped overnight. Feed the 2 horses my grandfather had left behind and that nobody except me seemed to remember existed. I did this twice a week, sometimes 3 times, depending on the season, depending on what needed doing. My brother lived in Calgary. He worked in finance. He visited at Christmas when the roads were good. The letter came in January, 3 weeks after our grandfather's funeral. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in Carstairs, still in my work clothes, reading it twice because the first time didn't fully land. My grandfather had died without a formal will beyond a handwritten note, and that note, according to the estate lawyer, was not legally enforceable in Alberta. That meant the property fell to intestate succession, split equally between his 2 surviving grandchildren, my brother and me. Except the property was already in my name. Had been for 4 years. My grandfather had put it there himself. Not secretly, not under pressure. He'd done it at a proper notary in Olds, with 2 witnesses, after I moved back from Edmonton to help him manage things when his knees got bad and he couldn't get down the porch steps without gripping the railing with both hands. He'd said, plain as anything, that he wanted the land to stay with the person who was going to take care of it. I never thought much about that moment after. It just seemed like a practical decision made by a practical man. My brother thought differently. His letter, or rather, his lawyer's letter, argued that our grandfather had been in cognitive decline at the time of the transfer, that I had acted in a position of undue influence, that the transfer should be voided. He wanted half the property. Appraised value at the time was just over $1.1 million. I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I'm not sure what I felt exactly. Something flat and hollow, the kind of feeling that comes when a story you thought you knew gets retold by someone who wasn't in it. My grandfather hadn't been in cognitive decline. He'd been sharp until the last 6 months, and even then, sharp enough. He'd finished the crossword most mornings. He remembered the exact price he'd paid for his first tractor in 1974. He could name every family who'd ever owned the adjacent quarter section going back to the 1930s. But I knew that didn't matter as much as I wanted it to. What mattered was what I could prove and what my brother's lawyer was willing to argue. I called the number the estate lawyer had given me, and that was how I found my own lawyer. His office was above a tire shop on Main Street in Olds, which is exactly the kind of detail that sounds like I'm making it up, but isn't. He was maybe 40, careful with his words, wore a fleece vest over his dress shirt like every other man in central Alberta who has to look professional, but also has to go outside sometimes. He read through the documents and said, "This is manageable." The transfer was clean. The notary records are solid. Your grandfather had independent legal counsel at the time. That matters. Then he paused. "But I want you to understand," he said, "that these cases get complicated when family is involved. Not legally, personally." He was right. He was very right. The first mediation session was in February in a beige boardroom in Red Deer. My brother was across the table. We hadn't spoken since the funeral. He looked tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. I recognized it because I felt it too. It was the tired of people who have been circling something difficult for a very long time without naming it. His lawyer was polished and spoke in the way lawyers do when they've decided the other side doesn't have much to stand on but want to look reasonable anyway. He said things like our position is simply, and in the spirit of family harmony. My brother said very little. At one point he said, "This isn't personal." I didn't answer that. My lawyer and I left that meeting without agreeing to anything. Driving home on the Kiri 2 in the dark, I thought about the last real conversation I'd had with my grandfather. about 3 weeks before he died. We were sitting at his kitchen table drinking instant coffee, which he preferred over real coffee for reasons he could never fully explain, and he'd looked out the window at the property, at the field stubble poking up through the snow, and said, "You know what this land asks of you." I said no. He said, "Just that you show up. That's all it ever asks." I thought about that a lot over the next several months. The legal process in Alberta moves at its own pace. There were filings, responses, requests for financial disclosure. My lawyer kept me informed. He was thorough and calm, and I could tell he believed in the case. He called me one evening in March, later than usual, and said, "I need you to think carefully about something. If this goes to a full hearing, we can win. The transfer documents are airtight. The notary is willing to testify. I have a geriatric specialist who reviewed your grandfather's medical records from that period and will confirm there was no cognitive impairment affecting his decision-making capacity. We can put this away." I told him I needed to think. He said, "Thinking is fine, but don't think too long." What he didn't know, and what I hadn't told him yet, was that I'd spent the past 2 weeks reading through every document attached to the property, not just the title transfer, everything. The environmental agreements my grandfather had signed with the Nature Conservancy of Canada in 2009, the conservation easement registered on the land title that restricted subdivision and development in perpetuity, the stewardship requirements, annual reporting, restricted pesticide use on the Southern Quarter, maintenance of the riparian buffer along the creek. There was also a heritage designation application, started but never completed, that would have additional implications if it were ever finalized. None of this was hidden. It was all registered, all public record, all attached to the title in exactly the way such things are meant to be. My grandfather had been proud of these agreements. He thought they were the right thing. He used to say that the land had been there long before him and would be there long after, and his job was not to extract from it, but to leave it better than he found it. These obligations did not disappear when ownership changed hands. They followed the land. They always had. My brother's lawyer, I came to understand, had looked at the land title and seen $1.1 million in Alberta real estate. He had not looked further. I didn't tell my lawyer what I was thinking yet. I needed to sit with it. There's a difference between knowing something and deciding what to do with what you know. The second mediation session happened in April. This time, my brother brought his wife. She sat slightly behind him and to the left, which I noticed because it was the posture of someone who had been briefed rather than someone who was fully present. My brother made an offer. He would accept a cash settlement of $400,000 in lieu of the property transfer. My lawyer leaned toward me and said quietly, "This is less than half the appraised value." He's nervous. I said, "Give me a moment." I looked at my brother across the table. He was 41. We'd grown up in the same house, gone to the same school, eaten dinner at the same table every night for 18 years. He taught me to skate when I was 4 because our parents were working and he was 12 and it was a Saturday, and he figured it was time I learned. I remembered that. I also remembered that he hadn't once, in 6 years of me driving out to that property, asked what it cost me. Not in time, not in money, not in the 100 small decisions that come with being the person who shows up. I declined the offer. By June, we were scheduled for a hearing before Judge Alderton at the Court of King's Bench in Calgary. My lawyer worked hard. He prepared thoroughly. He told me the week before that he was confident. He said we would win, and I believed him. I also told him, the night before the hearing, what I'd decided. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You understand what you're doing?" I said yes. He said, "I'm going to need you to say that to me one more time in the morning." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Dark wood, institutional lighting, the particular stillness of a room where difficult things get decided without anyone raising their voice. Judge Alderton was methodical. My brother's lawyer presented their case first, fluently and with conviction. My lawyer presented ours carefully and with evidence. Then the documents were placed before me. I picked up the pen. My brother was watching me now. His wife had her hands folded in her lap. My lawyer sat very still beside me. I signed. My brother exhaled. His lawyer smiled. I set the pen down, and then I watched his lawyer begin to flip through the supporting documents, the ones attached to the title transfer, the full title package, the registered instruments, His flipping slowed, then stopped. I watched him go back 2 pages, then 3. His posture changed, in the way posture changes when the body understands something before the mind catches up. He leaned in closer. He read. He read again. Judge Alderton noticed. "Is there an issue, counsel?" There was a pause that lasted just slightly too long. "No, Your Honor. Just reviewing." But his voice had shifted. It had lost the quality it had 5 minutes earlier. My lawyer turned to look at me. I didn't move. I kept my hands folded in my lap and waited because I already knew what he was finding. The conservation easement, the NCC agreements, the stewardship obligations, the annual reporting requirements, the restricted use provisions, the capital expenditure expectations for maintaining fencing and riparian buffers, all of it registered, all of it transferred, all of it now belonging to my brother in the same breath as the title. The hearing concluded. People stood. Chairs moved. My brother was still smiling. His lawyer was not. In the hallway, I could hear the lawyer speaking to my brother in a low, controlled voice. I did not turn around. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something that wasn't exactly peace but was close to it. Not triumph. Just relief. The specific relief of having told the truth by getting out of its way. My lawyer fell into step beside me. He didn't speak until we were outside. On the steps of the courthouse, in the gray Calgary afternoon, he looked at me for a moment. "You knew," he said. "I knew," I said. He shook his head slowly, but not with anger. More with the expression of someone recalibrating something. "I've been doing this for 16 years, he said. "I've never seen anyone do that." "I didn't do anything," I said. "The land came with what it came with. I just stopped carrying it alone." He nodded at that, exhaled. "Then what happens now?" I said. "That's up to him." The drive back to Carstairs was long and quiet. I stopped at a Tim Hortons in Airdrie because I hadn't eaten since 5 that morning, and I sat at a small table by the window with a coffee and a sandwich and watched the parking lot for a while. People coming and going with their ordinary Tuesdays. I thought about my grandfather and the crossword on his kitchen table and the way the field looked in early April when the snow finally let go and the ground came back to itself. I thought about what it means to take care of something for its own sake, without an audience, without acknowledgement, just because it's yours to do. My phone rang that evening. My brother. I almost didn't pick up. Not from anger. I want to be clear about that. More from knowing that whatever he said would change something. And I wasn't quite ready for things to change yet. But I answered. He said, "I need to understand what I signed." I said, "You signed the same thing I signed 4 years ago. The land has always come with these obligations." He was quiet. Then he said, "Our lawyer didn't explain this." "Your lawyer didn't read it," I said. "Not all of it." That was more direct than I usually am. He didn't push back. "I'm talking about the NCC agreement," he said. "The easement." He paused. "How much does the annual reporting cost?" I told him. He went quiet again. Then, the fencing along the creek. I told him about that too. The requirement to maintain a 30-meter vegetative buffer. The restrictions on cattle access to the riparian zone. The reporting to the federal stewardship coordinator. The cost of the environmental consultant I'd hired 3 years earlier when a spring flood shifted part of the bank and we needed a professional assessment to stay in compliance. He didn't say anything for a long time. "My mother," he finally said, meaning their mother, our mother. "Did she know about all this?" "No," I said. Nobody asked. The calls became more frequent after that, less combative each time. More like someone trying to piece together a picture they'd had partially assembled for years and were only now realizing they'd been working from the wrong edge. His wife called once, which surprised me. She was warmer than I expected. She said, "I think we misunderstood what this property actually was." I said, "Most people do until they're the one responsible for it." She asked if I would be willing to walk them through the stewardship requirements. I said yes, I was. We met at the property in late July. First time I'd been out there since the hearing. The hay was high on the north field. The horses were fine, placid as always, indifferent to human difficulties. My brother walked the fence lines slowly while I explained what was required. His wife took notes on her phone. At one point he stopped and looked at the creek. The willows along the bank were thick with summer. You did all this yourself, he said. It wasn't a question. Mostly, I said. I hired out for the big stuff. He didn't say anything. He kept walking. Later, at the kitchen table in the farmhouse, the same table where my grandfather had drunk his instant coffee and done his crossword, my brother spread out the documents his lawyer had finally, belatedly reviewed in full. He looked older somehow than he had in the courtroom. Not tired, exactly. More honest. I didn't understand what I was asking for, he said. I know, I said. He looked up at me. That's it? That's all you're gonna say? I thought about it. I said, what would you like me to say? He was quiet. Then, I thought you were trying to take something from the family. I looked at the window, at the field outside, at the line of trees my grandfather had planted along the north edge as a windbreak 50 years ago. They were tall now, taller than anything else on the property. I was trying to keep something for the family, I said. There's a difference. He looked at the table. He said, I know that now. His lawyer called mine a few weeks later, requesting copies of the original stewardship agreements and the compliance records I kept over the years. The tone was completely different, not adversarial, almost apologetic. My lawyer forwarded the documents and called me afterward. He said, they're overwhelmed. I said, I know. He said, they might ask you for help with the compliance work. I said, I'll answer questions. I won't take it back. He said, I'll answer questions. I won't take it back. He said, that's a reasonable position. I meant it as more than a position. It was a decision I'd made about what kind of person I wanted to be on the other side of this. Not someone who rescues, not someone who holds a grudge. Just someone who tells the truth when asked and lets other people live with the consequences of their own choices. My brother and I are not where we were. I won't pretend we are. There are things said and done in a legal dispute that don't simply dissolve because the dispute ends. Some of that will take years. Some of it might not fully resolve. I've accepted that. What I didn't expect was how quickly some things shifted on their own. He started calling on Sunday mornings. Not every Sunday, but regularly. Sometimes to ask about the property. Sometimes just to talk about nothing much. The way we used to when we were kids. And Sunday was the one day nobody had anywhere to be. Last month he asked if I wanted to come out to the property together for the annual boundary walk, the one required under the easement, the one I'd done alone for 6 years. I said yes. We walked the full perimeter, checked the fences, documented the creek bank. He took the notes this time, methodically, getting the GPS coordinates right. At the southeast corner, where the creek bends and the willows are thickest, he stopped and said, I didn't know land could have a personality. I said, this one does. He nodded, like that was a complete answer. And maybe it was. My grandfather used to say that property isn't really about ownership, it's about relationship. Who you are to the land and what the land asks of you. I didn't fully understand that when he said it. I think I do now. I'm not a landowner anymore. I'm not sure what exactly I am in relation to that property now. A former steward, maybe. Someone who kept something intact until the people who were supposed to care for it were ready to try. I think I can live with that. For anyone listening who has been the one who shows up, who pays the costs that nobody tallies, who carries the weight of something because someone has to, I want to say this directly, your work is real even when it goes unrecorded. The truth of what you did doesn't require a courtroom to be true. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop explaining yourself and let reality do the work. It's slower that way. It's less satisfying in the short term. But it's honest. And in my experience, honesty has a longer memory than pride does. My brother texted me last week. Just a photo, the north field at sunset, the windbreak trees lit up gold along the edge. No caption, just the picture. I saved it. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that courtroom, not the legal part, but the human part. My brother walked in believing he was owed something. I walked in having already decided what I was willing to carry and what I wasn't. Those are two very different postures, and I think they explain everything that followed. There's a version of this story where I fought him, where I put his negligence on record, subpoenaed his financial history, called witnesses who could speak to every year he didn't show up. My lawyer wanted that version. And honestly, part of me wanted it too. The part that gets tired of being the responsible one and receives nothing for it except more responsibility. But I've learned, slowly and not without difficulty, that winning an argument and telling the truth are not the same thing. You can win an argument by being louder, sharper, better prepared. The truth doesn't need any of that, it just needs to not be blocked. What my brother didn't understand, and what I had to understand for myself before I could make that decision in the courtroom, is that responsibility isn't a trophy. It doesn't go to whoever wants it most. It goes to whoever shows up for it, consistently, quietly, often without thanks. 6 years of driving out to that property in January cold. 6 years of annual stewardship reports and fence inspections and riparian compliance checks. 6 years of being the person who knew what the land actually asked of you. That didn't disappear when he signed his name. It transferred with the title, exactly the way everything attached to that land always had. That's the part I want to be clear about, because I think people misread stories like this as strategy, as if I was clever, as if I laid a trap. I didn't. I simply stopped hiding the weight of something so that someone else could pretend it was light. There's a difference between a trap and the truth that was always there, waiting to be read. What I've come to believe is that people who avoid responsibility don't escape it. They just delay their encounter with it. My brother spent 6 years not asking questions. Not once did he call to ask what the property taxes were running, or whether the NCC agreement required anything that year, or how the horses were doing. He didn't ask because asking would have made the wait real, and he preferred the idea of the inheritance over the reality of the land. When the reality finally arrived, it arrived all at once, in a conference room in Calgary through a document his own lawyer hadn't fully read. That's not punishment. That's just how cause and effect works when nobody interferes with it. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the hearing or the months of legal back and forth. The hardest part was deciding not to rescue him from the consequences. I'm someone who fixes things. That's been my role in this family for as long as I can remember. Knowing when to stop fixing, knowing when fixing is actually just enabling, that took more out of me than anything the legal process did. I don't think my brother is a bad person. I think he was someone who made the mistake of valuing ownership over stewardship, and who had to learn the difference the hard way. We're different now than we were. Not fixed, not fully healed, but different. More honest. And honestly, that feels like more than I expected to get out of any of this. The land is still there. The windbreak trees my grandfather planted are still growing. The creek still needs its buffer. Some things continue regardless of who holds the title. I find that steadying, somehow.